What happens when a really loving bond between a parent and a child just shatters after a messy divorce? It's not always a simple case of growing apart. Sometimes it's something way more complicated and, frankly, a lot more painful. We're talking about parental alienation.
And this isn't just some temporary family drama that blows over. The emotional fallout can last a lifetime. I mean, listen to this. We're talking about decades-long cycles of anger, guilt, and mistrust that can seriously mess with a person's ability to have healthy relationships as an adult.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at why this whole concept is so debated. Then, we'll get into how experts can tell the difference between alienation and justified estrangement. After that, we'll explore new paths to reconnection, get our hands on a practical communication toolkit, and finally check out the evolving role of the courts.
Okay, first things first, let's get right into the heart of the debate. Because the term parental alienation itself, well, it's loaded. It carries a ton of weight and, as you'll see, a whole lot of controversy.
So what is it, really? At its core, parental alienation is this dynamic where a child is slowly and systematically manipulated by one parent to reject the other parent, a parent they used to have a perfectly healthy, loving relationship with. It's a process, not just a one-time thing.
And this is where things get really tricky. We're looking at a huge paradox. On the one hand, a ton of research shows these alienating behaviors cause severe, long-lasting damage to kids. We're talking anxiety, trauma, rock-bottom self-esteem. But on the other hand, it's not officially recognized as a disorder in the big diagnostic manuals like the DSM-5. And critics rightly warn that the term can be twisted and used as a weapon in nasty custody battles. This is the central conflict you've got to grasp to understand the whole issue.
Okay, so that leads us to a super important question. How in the world can you tell the difference between a child who's been manipulated and one who is rejecting a parent for totally valid reasons, like abuse or neglect? Getting this right is absolutely critical.
For any professional who gets involved, a therapist, a forensic evaluator, this is job number one. Because if you get it wrong, the consequences are just devastating. You could either fail to protect a child who's being manipulated, or just as awful, force a child back into a relationship with a genuinely harmful parent.
So experts use a pretty clear framework to sort this out. In what they call pathological alienation, you almost always see that there used to be a warm, positive relationship that just suddenly tanked. The kid's reasons for hating the parent sound kind of flimsy or rehearsed, maybe even using adult-like phrases. They do this thing called splitting. One parent becomes all good, the other becomes all bad. And there's this chilling lack of guilt about it. Now contrast that with realistic estrangement. There, you'll find a clear history of poor parenting. The child gives specific, valid reasons for being scared or angry, and they can still see that the parent isn't 100% evil.
So what happens if alienation is what's really going on? What can be done? Well, the whole mindset is shifting away from force and more towards healing. So let's look at some of the modern ways to try and reconnect.
Today's approach is what's called trauma-informed. What that really means is that the child's emotional safety and their readiness comes first, period. The process has to be slow, it has to be voluntary, and it has to validate the child's feelings, even if those feelings are based on things that aren't true. You have to give the child a sense of control. We now know for sure that forcing things with rigid schedules just makes the trauma worse and almost always backfires.
And you've got to adapt this even more for neurodivergent kids. For instance, autistic children often think in very black and white terms, which can make them extra vulnerable to an alienating parent's good versus evil story. So, reconnecting with them means creating predictability with things like visual schedules, respecting their sensory needs, and, maybe most importantly, truly accepting their neurodivergence. I mean, get this. Many estranged autistic adults say the split happened because they felt like their parent just didn't accept their autism.
Okay, let's get practical. Trying to communicate in these situations can feel like walking through a minefield. But experts have come up with some very specific, hands-on tools to help targeted parents calm things down and maybe, just maybe, create an opening for connection.
A huge one is the BIF method. It stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. The idea is to keep your texts or emails super short and just stick to the facts. That gives the other person less ammunition to use against you. Use a neutral, friendly tone to kind of take the wind out of their sails. And then you're firm. You end the conversation without opening the door for a big argument. The whole point is to just stop that toxic, endless back and forth.
So what about when your own kid makes a false accusation? This is so tough. But the recommended way to handle it is really surprising. You actually start with gratitude and empathy.
You validate their feeling without agreeing with the false fact. Acknowledge how much it must hurt to feel that way. Then, and only then, you gently and very briefly correct the facts, and then you immediately go right back to their feelings. The goal is simple, but it's so powerful. You prioritize the connection over being correct.
Another amazing model is called PACE. It's playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Basically, by taking this calm, curious, non-judgmental approach, a parent can create an emotionally safe space. And that can help the child finally lower their guard and start to see things in shades of gray again, instead of just black and white.
All right, finally, let's shift gears and talk about the legal system. How are the courts starting to handle this incredibly complex psychological mess?
Well, there's definitely been some real legal momentum lately. New laws are pushing courts to make child safety the #1 priority and to actually look at psychological abuse, including stuff like alienating behaviors and coercive control. This is leading to way more training for judges and evaluators so they can get better at spotting this stuff.
But, and this is a huge but, experts are also waving a big red flag. A recent review put it bluntly, warning that some of these court-ordered reunification programs have no proof they work and might actually be harming the child. Forcing a kid into some rigid, one-size-fits-all program can just create more trauma.
So, the goal now is to find this very delicate balance. Yes, let's have early intervention with courts and therapists working together, but it has to be tailored to each family and guided by one non-negotiable principle: protecting the child's well-being above everything else.
And this quote really just reframes the whole mission, doesn't it? It's not about winning a court case or getting your parental authority back. Real, effective reunification is about repairing a relationship in a way that's genuine, that's sustainable, and that's ethically right for the child.
Which leaves us with one final, and I think really important question to think about. In any kind of intense family conflict, whether it's this or something else, how do we, as parents, as professionals, as a society, make that fundamental shift in our thinking? How do we stop trying to win the fight and start trying to heal the relationship?